Welcome back. So during this short lecture, we are going to talk about a couple of more interesting operators in C++. So we'll be using these constructors, heavily, especially in loops like for loops, while loops. Later we are going to talk about them. Today let's focus on these two operators and then see exactly what is the meaning of these two operators and then how to use them in a simple expression. All right. Now, what is the requirement for having increment and decrement operators? So usually in a program, so we might need to keep a counter to keep track of how many times a particular thing is happening, right? If you have a situation like that, so we can define an integer variable so that keep track of how many times a particular instruction has been executed, right? So this is a very kind of useful construct in loops where we are going to repeat certain things over and over again. So we might need to count how many times we have to repeat and then how many times we have been repeating and so on and so forth, right? Now if you have then a counter variable like this, so when a particular event happens, so we need to increment the counter by 1 to indicate that the operation has happened one more time, right? So there are multiple ways for us to do this increment. So one of the ways to do that is to add 1 to the variable count. So we can say count equals count plus 1. In addition to that, so there are a couple of other constructs that we're using heavily in programming. So rather than writing the complete statement, so we can actually put 2 plus signs after the variable name. So that will also equivalent to the previous statement in terms of the final effect for the variable. That means adding 1 to the count, right? So likewise we can put 2 plus signs in front of the variable name also. So that also has a final effect of incrementing a count by 1. So since we have these 2 plus signs either at the end of the variable name or at the beginning of the variable name, so we call it post or pre-increment respectively, right? So this pre and post increment then has some implication as to how we use it in a statement, right? So let's take a couple of examples and then see how this pre and post increment works when we put it in assignment statement, right? So suppose we have 2 variables, so integer variables x and y, and then we are assigning 5 to the integer variable x, right? So let's walk through this example and then see what happens to x and y once you run through these two, right? Now we know that we'll be assigning placeholders in the computer memory for these 2 variables x and y, and initially both of them are empty, right, for x and y here. So this x and this is y. So that what happens when we define it, right? Now after defining it, so we put 5 into the variable x. Now after that, so we have plus plus x here. Now when we have plus plus x, we know that it is pre-increment. Now what does it mean by a pre-increment in this kind of a scenario? So in here then, so pre-increment means, so before we are doing the assignment, so we will be incrementing x by 1. So therefore this will happen first and then assignment will happen second, okay? Now if the increment is going to happen first, so then what happens is that with this particular statement, so 5 will become 6 and then the resulting value will be assigned to y. So therefore when you do the assignment statement, x has already been incremented, so therefore y will be 6 in here, right? So therefore in this scenario, when you have the pre-increment, so x will be 6 and y will be 6. Now this pre essentially means that, so we will be incrementing the value before we are performing the assignment statement, all right? So then pre with respect to the assignment statement, right? So on the other hand, suppose we have the post increment. Now in here then again we will have these 2 values for the memory. So initially x is going to be 5 and now we have the post increment. Now post increment means that first we are going to do the assignment statement and then so we are going to increment x by 1, okay? So when you are performing this assignment statement then, so initially we take the current value stored in x and then put it in y and then so we are going to add 1 to x, right? So another way to actually put this statement is something like this. So we can say y equals x and then x equals x plus 1. So these two statements will perform exact same effect as this single statement. So therefore this will be done first. So that means that currently value of x is 5 and then y will be 5. So after doing that, so we'll be incrementing x by 1. So then in this case x will be 6, right? So therefore x will be 6 and y will be 5 in this scenario, right? So on the other hand, in this case both x and y are going to be 6. So to understand this again, so if we write the corresponding two equivalent statement in here, so this is pretty much equivalent to x equals x plus 1 and then y equals x, all right? So therefore x will be incremented by 1 first and then we assign the value of x to y. Okay, so that's kind of the implication of pre and post increment in an assignment statement. Okay, so similar to the assignment statement and the pre and post increment, so we can do pre and post decrement operation as well, right? So when you are doing this decrement operation, so rather than doing the increment, so we are going to decrement 1. Okay, so that means we are going to deduct 1 from the current value, all right? So now let's run through this example and then see what happens here. So this actually is decrement. Okay, so now in here then, so we will be assigning 5 to x and then we need to calculate y based on this statement. So since this is pre-decrement, so we know that this statement is equal to x equals x minus 1 and then y equals x, right? So when you have x equals x minus 1 first, so then we will be subtracting 1 from x, so then x will be 4 and then we are assigning the change value of x to y, so then y will be 4. So then in this case both x and y are going to be 4, right? So now if you go to the post decrement, so it's kind of the opposite of what happened here. So that means that we'll be first assigning the current value of x to y and then subtracting 1 from x, right? So therefore in this case, so we have 5 here, so then we assign this one, so we are going to assign the current value of x to y, so then y will be 5. So after that we are subtracting 1 from x, so then x will be 4. Okay, so then after executing this statement then, so x will be 4 and then y will be 5, right? So that's the implication of post and pre decrement. This is very similar to the increment operator, just that we subtract 1 from the variable rather than doing the addition, all right? Now so another thing about the pre and post increment and decrement operators is that these operators are available for integer variables only. So this is not going to work with double variables, all right? Okay, now let's do a quick checkpointing question and then see if we understand the pre and post increment and decrement scenario pretty well. All right, so now let's move on to another construct that we might heavily see in programming. So it's called compound assignment statements. So most of the cases actually, even in the previous case, we saw that we have increment and decrement operators. So in that case, so we have the same variable in the left hand side, so as well as the right hand side. So in here, for example, so we are saying x equals x plus y. That means we are adding y to x and then put it back in the variable x. So in this case then both x is variable x is repeating in the both right hand side as well as the left hand side. So in order for us to kind of put it in more compact form, so we can represent this one as x plus equals y. So plus equals is essentially expanded into x equals x plus y. So there is no pre and post implication as such. In this case, it's just another notation of representing this type of expressions using more compact statements rather than repeating the variable name 2 times. So we are pretty much kind of having a compact statement, right? So likewise, when you say x equals x minus y, so that can be represented as minus equals. So therefore, x minus equals y. So that is x equals x minus y, right? So likewise, we can do the same thing for the multiplication. So x equals x times y. So that we can write as x times equals y. So that's essentially x equals x times y. So likewise, we can perform other operations like division and the mod operation exactly the same way. So in this scenario again, so this is just a notational representation. So there's no pre-post type implication when you put it in a statement, right? So it's much easier way to write down the statement without repeating the variable name again, right? So that's again another commonly used constructs in programming languages, most of the programming languages, including C++, right? So I hope this lecture pretty much then covers some of the basic notations and operators that we will be using in programming. So then we will use these things during the semester as we write programs. All right. Okay.